Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Startup Talk. And today we're going to talk about crowdsourcing and more specific about innovation via the crowd. Now, working together online isn't something new, especially since a lot of us have been primarily working from home due to Corona. But what if I told you that online collaboration is more than a shared Google Doc or a team in Teams? A Teams team? A Teams team. Imagine being able to develop high-tech solutions like a hyperloop, like flying motorcycles and robots, all 100% online with experts from all over the world. And what if I told you you don't have to imagine it because it's already here? That is innovating using the power of the crowd. And today we're going to talk about everything you need to know about crowdsourcing and how it can help you and your business. But before we take off on our flying motorcycle, we'll start off with the basics. What is crowdsourcing? When is it appropriate to turn to the crowd? And what does the future of crowdsourcing look like? Well, if you're new to the show, welcome. My name is Saskia and I help people turn their passion into a thriving business. And one way that I do this is by hosting Startup Talk. Every week, I host a new guest and we'll cover a topic about entrepreneurship and starting your business. So if you want to connect with like-minded entrepreneurs every week to share your best practices, lessons learned, wins and frustrations, so we can all grow together, then make sure to subscribe. We're live every Thursday, 7 o'clock in the evening, Central European time. So this time on Facebook and YouTube. And if that time doesn't work for you, then fear not. You can rewatch this episode on Facebook, YouTube, and the website of the Startup Suite. And it's also available as a podcast on Spotify and iTunes. So however you're tuning in, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And share your thoughts in the comments. Whether you're listening live or watching the replay, that section is there for a reason. Let us know what you think. Now, for today's show, I am joined by the incredible Brent Lessard. Brent is best known as the co-founder of rLoop. His work on high-speed ground-based transportation and his research and speaking on organizational structures. And besides that, he's also a great personal friend. I've been in rLoop for the last 3 years and I've worked with Brent on all sorts of projects like decentralized prototyping and global incentive competitions. So when I started Startup Talk, I knew I had to have Brent on the show to have a talk about crowdsourced innovation and the future of work. So let's give a warm welcome to Brent Lessard. Hey, Brent.
Hey, Saskia, thanks for having me. How are you?
Hey, yeah, it's welcome on the show. It's a pleasure to have you. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. It's interesting times that we're all living through, I think. And, end of April here in Ontario, Canada, and we've got snow coming down. So got to be happy about that.
It's so weird. We had the same here last week. So yeah, Eindhoven, the Netherlands, mid-April, snow. What's happening? What's happening? It's time for spring to come here. So I hope spring is will be visiting you soon as well. So you've been doing crowdsourced innovation ever since 2015, since before it was cool. Now, I know that story. I'm part of that story. But for the viewers, how did that all came to be?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we started rLoop in 2015. It was quite an organic development at the time. It was, a community of like-minded people on Reddit who were, fans of innovation, new tech, and especially a focus on aerospace and SpaceX in particular. So it started as just a kind of online community to discuss and share news about what was going on with SpaceX and with other similar type companies. And then I think it was 2013 that Elon and SpaceX released what's called the alpha paper now for the Hyperloop, which was his concept for a new means of ground-based transportation. That was 2013. A few years went by, not a lot of developments were made, and so they created this incentive competition. SpaceX hosting a Hyperloop competition where they basically said, we're going to build the infrastructure and we invite universities as well as independent engineering teams to make their designs. We'll approve a number of them and they can come and test them on our infrastructure here. And someone within that subreddit said, I went through the rules and there's nothing that would like prevent us as an online community or an online group from forming a team and entering the competition. And that was like the impetus for, 6-7 years of incredible community building, inputs from over 1,200, 1,300 people from more than 50 countries around the world, multiple different projects, prototypes, and still a thriving community and ongoing work. All just from that, initial community, internet community, an incentive competition, and then some, really passionate people who put a lot of time and effort into building something cool and meaningful. So that was the kind of origin story for rLoop.
Yeah, and I was there, part of that origin story, and I think one of the great things about rLoop is really that passion and that drive that people have. They're there because they love to be there, to love on that kind of technology, and that's also one of the things that makes it so amazing to be a part of that community. But of course, this is a completely different way of innovating if you compare it to the typical organizations, even if it's a startup or a big company, but when it's within a structured organization. How was that different in rLoop, especially in the early days, I can imagine?
Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. Like you got to remember, this was 2015, 6 years ago. A lot of the tools that are available now to collaborate online weren't available, and even now it's kind of really nascent to a lot of this tech, and especially when you frame it against complex projects or systems that require people from a variety of different disciplines collaborating together. So, and like you said, we had no infrastructure existing really. We had like a message board, and that was it at the time.
Was it still on Reddit?
Yeah, it was just on Reddit. So it was essentially a message board, and that was it. And but it just kind of showed you, like reflecting on it now, what you can do when you've got a group of people with similar interests coming together with meaning and purpose, what they're able to do and to achieve. So a lot of these tools to facilitate that type of collaboration didn't exist, or we had to, kind of structure ourselves in unique or different ways to be able to work in that kind of online collaborative environment. And there was a whole lot of trial and error. There was a whole lot of, learnings along the way. But it's incredible now to look at kind of how far we've come from those early days, how mature not only rLoop and rLoop's community has become, but also the general space, which has been, greatly accelerated over the past year and a half with the need to, because of coronavirus, travel restrictions, lockdowns, global pandemic. All of a sudden, everybody had to shift to, in some capacity at least, working online. And I think it's been great from that perspective. And in the context of like launching a new business now, being an entrepreneur now, there's so many of these tools that are available to you. They're really accessible, and not only that, they cost next to nothing. To get to scaffold something up to tap into the crowd and leverage that knowledge within the crowd and build communities So I'd say it's really really interesting and exciting time for this, and I think it's only going to grow and become more profound. This type of online collaborative communities.
Yeah, and I can second that. Ever since Corona and everyone having to work online more and more, you see an explosion of people working from home, also running their business from home. So online tools, digital tools are more important than ever, but you see so many startups just popping up to facilitate that. Last week, I came across a startup. It's called Hi Right Now, which is literally a way to have a nice introduction to each other and stay in contact with each other when you're a decentralized team. And that's of course just one of the things. I bet when the lockdown just happened a year ago, Zoom, Teams, Slack, it all exploded. So let's start at the beginning. Say you're an entrepreneur and you want to leverage the power of the crowd. You want to develop something. You want to innovate using the power of the crowd. Where do you start?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think that the foundation for everything is going to be the community that you're building or that you're accessing. So one of the important things is to, I think, probably first understand where that community is currently meeting. How do they connect online? What kind of interactions do they have? Do they have a place to get together? To share these ideas, to share their thoughts, to have a kind of feedback loop amongst or within the community. And if it doesn't exist, then that's where your work is going to be focused on initially, right? You need to be able to build a community, give them a reason to be there, keep them engaged. That would be the first thing. If there is an existing place that you can get in front of and access an audience that would be interested in whatever it is that you're doing, then you should immerse yourself in that community, understand how they interact, what tools they're using, they're familiar with, how they like to communicate. And I think, essentially, if I were to distill everything down, I think communication is going to be one of the biggest components of successfully building a community, leveraging a community for some of your goals or objectives. And it's not just the tools that you're using either. The tools are they're just that. They're a tool. It's a medium to use. But what you really need to pay attention to is effective communication, which isn't just delivering your message, but it's hearing the audience, getting that feedback, earnestly listening to them and being able to interact in a positive and meaningful way with that community. That's one of the most critical components to be successful with something like this, I would suggest.
Yeah, I can second that, especially with working together with people you've never seen in person. It can be a great and wonderful experience, but how do you stay in contact with each other? How do you stay engaged? Especially.
Do you remember? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Do you remember the first time that we met in person?
Yes. Yeah, that was 3 years ago, North Carolina in the US.
Oh yes, that's right.
That's right.
Okay, so that was pre our collaborating online then.
Yeah.
But after collaborating online.
I remember that. That was amazing.
Well, there were a number of us who got together in Europe. We'd been working together online for well over a year, if not 2+ years, and never met in person. And then when we did meet in person, there was this instant familiarity.
There was, but it was also a bit reality versus expectations. I remember you all I went to pick you guys up. I think it was in Frankfurt Airport, somewhere over there. And so you I've met once before, but that was 2 years ago or something. And then there's this familiarity, like, hey, I know you, and we've been talking so much online, and now I finally see you in person. That was also with the rest of the team. But I remember one, you remember Jaka, right? He was from Lithuania, and he has a very deep... Slovenia, sorry. And he has a very deep voice. So I imagine him to be like this big, bulky guy, you know? And I remember I picked him up at the gate, and I was like, where's the rest of you? Because he was, you know, you just don't expect it. And that's so funny. You work together with a whole group of people. You create amazing stuff together. And then still after 2 years, you actually meet for the first time. And it's like, hey, wait, you're still different than I imagined, even though I really know you.
Yeah, not to derail the conversation around startups and entrepreneurship, but it's I think it's really important that it's interesting to understand that, like, communication is very, very important and integral to, you know, working together cohesively. And there's so many nuances there, you know, everybody coming from different backgrounds, from different cultural norms, from different political viewpoints, and you know, social and economic backgrounds. It's really hard to establish like meaningful connection with people. But there's more and more tools becoming available to facilitate that. But
which tool would you recommend? Just continue your story as well, but just short in between, which number one tool would you recommend for that?
Well, it's hard, right? Like video conferencing, video calls have become so pervasive now. Everybody, you know, I had to teach my parents how to use Zoom and stuff a year ago, and now they're like more fluent with it than I am. But you know, like, video conferencing is great to have this, you know, face-to-face contact and communication. But like you were saying, there's still something missing there. There's not the depth of the interaction. And like you were saying about Jaka, you had established this kind of idea in your mind of what he looked like, even though you'd had video calls with him and seen him before. So, I mean, there's a variety of different tools. Video conferencing, you know, if it's something that you're on a budget, you know, you can use Google Meets for free. There's open source stuff like Jitsi that's available as well. Many of those communication platforms like Slack and Teams have their own integrated systems now as well. So, you know, there's no shortage of like video conferencing tools. If you're working across borders or in different geographies, coordinating time zones and stuff can always be fun and a challenge. So you have to be kind of mindful of that. There's also a lot of easy to use tools to facilitate just coordinating meetings like that. One that I've recently been fond of using is called Lettuce Meet, like lettuce.
like the vegetable.
Yeah, like the vegetable lettuce meat, when you put it, let us meet, when you enunciate it. But it's like, you know, super easy to use and lightweight to use. And then there's, of course, the need for kind of written communication, which is really effective because people can go back and review it, you know, word for word, what was spoken, what was discussed, at their leisure. There's like there's a history that you can follow. So so I think there's a blend of tools really to establish an effective communication medium, and that would include video, audio, and text.
Yeah, so a combination of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you were talking about community engagement, and going back to that story when we met in Germany. The great thing about that was we were all working on the same project, and we had this serendipity of, hey, we're all kind of in the neighborhood, or at least in neighboring countries, so let's meet. So having that in-person meeting helped a lot as well, just seeing each other and just hanging out for a weekend in a German city and just, you know, discussing how we're going to continue with our projects helps, of course, as well. What other ways of community engagement would you recommend?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there was, it's important that I think you find with online communities, it's hard to really get that kind of deeper and meaningful engagement than you could have in a face-to-face, let's share an experience kind of setting.
Absolutely.
It's hard, and I think that there's a variety of different ways that you could approach it, but I would just kind of stress that using tools isn't necessarily the solution or the path to solve all of these kinds of issues. With all of the wonder that we're able to now speak across the planet in real time, and I can see you and look you in the eye through the screen. There's still that lack of a depth to it, and something, I don't know, like I've never really been able to properly kind of verbalize it. But the tech is not replacing that ability to connect and interact in a social and professional means. So you've got to be creative, you've got to think outside of the box, and you've got to figure out ways to kind of engage with your community that can, to some degree, replicate those kinds of interactions. And a lot of the time, it is in a fun, lighthearted manner. We've seen an explosion in like memes and in the meme space. It's like that's a means of communication, and that's something that people use to kind of coordinate around. So all of these things are available, and it's probably a blend of a variety of different things, trying to again replicate that kind of social and personal interaction that we would be able to have in person if we weren't separated by an immense space and ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recognize that using memes and GIFs or GIFs, however you want to call it, that's a whole discussion on its own, of course, is it's of course a great way to connect with each other without talking business, but have that lightheartedness and have a personal connection as well. And what I also really second, what you said earlier, is listening to your community. What is it that they want, they need, what are they looking for? And yeah, having that authentic connection by listening and trying to serve them in that way.
Yeah, it's like in startups, we always say, fall in love with the problem, not the solution, right? Figure out the problem that your community is having, and then get to know that intimately, and then start thinking about the solution. It's the same thing here. Like, people aren't going to want to come and sit and listen to you. You should be more interested in listening and connecting with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
From your standpoint, should be that's 80% of your job, is listening to your community. The 20% is communicating to them, but you're only going to be able to do that effectively or in a meaningful way if you really immerse yourself in what they are saying and what they're communicating to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also one of the reasons why I made this show live, why there's a reason that you can add comments live, so we can, that people can share their thoughts and can give their input, so that also gives us a sign like, hey, this is resonating or this isn't resonating. And of course, why nowadays it's so important to have that social online presence in different groups on Facebook, on Reddit, on LinkedIn, to know what are the problems that people are having and how can I serve to solve that. Another question I wanted to ask is, so crowdsourcing has a lot of potential, but is it always the way to go? When is it appropriate to turn to the crowd?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that it's always the way necessarily that you want to go. For some things, I think it's really important to be able to have a community to rally around your cause or your effort, because they will help to propel you forward and accelerate your growth and development. In many cases as well, it's really important to get that input from a diverse community from all of those different backgrounds, as opposed to a very similar group coming together to devise. There's all kinds of horror stories about tech development gone wrong because it's a group of people from the same cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds. Yeah, exactly. So I would think, especially in situations like that, where...
Could you give one example?
Could I give one example?
One example of groupthink. So those technical development projects where everyone thought, where the whole team was from such a same background and has the same way of thinking that they missed the boat. And I know I'm putting you on the spot right here, so it's okay if it's not on the top of your mind. But I'm typically, this kind of stuff. You're like, oh yes, I have one here right up my sleeve.
Well, I think there's lots of examples that you could find if you look online. But some that immediately come to mind, and I feel that I've read this somewhere, and I'm hoping it's not just like urban legend stuff that I'm recirculating here. But I believe, for example, there was a case about I can't remember now if it was motion sensors or light sensors.
Oh, I think we're losing audio.
Or something like that. Sorry.
Wait, I think we're having a glitch in the matrix. Yes, you're back.
Sorry,
you were talking about... Yes, we can now hear you. You were talking about motion sensors or light sensors.
Yeah, I think there was a case about motion sensors or light sensors that was essentially developed by a group of white guys in a lab, and was not really responding to different skin tones or colors.
I know that one. That's artificial intelligence that didn't recognize people who were non-white, so to speak.
Yeah, had different skin tones because it was just a group of and the old trope, I guess, is it's a group of old white guys in a boardroom who are coming up with these strategies or ideas, right? When you have that kind of narrow vision, they all come from similar backgrounds, similar educations, similar economic situations. They'll all think one way and they'll all move that way together, and it all makes sense to them. But if you're able to tap into a diverse group, you break those blinders or those restrictions, and you're able to create something that can actually have a meaningful impact for a much wider audience. There's another classic saying in entrepreneurship that's like, don't solve a problem that nobody's having. It's the same kind of situation here, right? If you're not in tune, communicating, and aware of the problems that your audience is having or your target is having, you're not going to build something or create something that they're going to want to engage with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I hope that's not an urban legend, by the way.
No, I've heard the example of the artificial intelligence wrongly not being able to detect certain skin tones. I've heard it before, also on conferences, although that isn't always the best resource. But it's that's
so stupid, right? When you think about it, when you look back at it, you're like, how can you be so stupid?
Well, I read. So one thing that's of course extremely current right now is the vaccine and AstraZeneca, where it can cause thrombose in females under 60. And I, as a female under 60, I did a bit of research, and it turned out that the vaccine is engineered towards males, and that the female body
exactly
has more. Yeah, I'm not a doctor, so I cannot explain it into the best detail. But the female body reacts different, and that's why the chance of thrombose is higher there, but less in male because it's typically engineered towards males.
Yeah, and that's just kind of reiterates the point, is that it's super important to have a diversity of inputs, especially if you're building something, that's intended to be deployed globally and in different regions and targeting different populations.
Absolutely.
Which is why, like when we're working on high-speed transportation, that affects so many different people in so many different ways. They all interact with transit infrastructure in different ways, and they all have different wants and needs from transportation in general. So it was super important and critical to us that we were able to not just get the input from a global audience, but that they could actively participate in helping to develop and build something, with the potential to really make a big impact on their life and their well-being and the well-being of their communities.
Yeah, well, it's the great thing of having a community of over 1,300 people or 1,600 by now. There's always someone with a different opinion, and that can lead to some very good discussions and actually learning something new and adapting your plan from there.
Yeah, and of course it comes with its challenges as well.
Yeah, because anything can be a discussion, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's. But I think that's. You see that more often in especially the high tech engineering groups, startups, communities. There's always room for discussion. So sometimes there's a lot of discussion going on there. So, Brent, we've now been working from home for a year. I've been working almost entirely at home from a year, and I know a lot of other people are doing this as well. So crowdsourcing and innovation via the crowd is becoming more and more of a thing. Where do you see this going in the future? Will we not return to the office anymore?
I think you'll probably see a hybrid approach, at least in the foreseeable future. I think organizations who had been forced to go remote start to see that it is actually people are still productive. They tend to be more productive, actually, and people tend to be happier because all of a sudden they're not commuting. They're not getting sick as frequently. So you're probably going to see a hybrid approach, and there's a lot of tools and tech that are coming online as well to facilitate that kind of work environment. So we're seeing the proliferation of communication tools, video conferencing, the ability to work on documents in real time with version control and version history. But you're also starting to see, like, we're working with a startup now called Ophisticate that is working on virtual offices. So you essentially have like a virtual floor plan for an office, and you can see when people are online. If they're in a meeting, you can join meeting rooms, stuff like that.
Really?
So really interesting. Yeah, it's kind of like an office, like replicating the real world office environment online, though.
After the show, share the link of them with me.
Yeah,
I'll
certainly
put it in the description of this video as well, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and they're targeting hybrid offices like that, as well as kind of totally virtual workspaces. So it's really interesting to see that kind of stuff pop up. And of course, what's going to make a big impact, I feel, is, and again, I'm just kind of talking on the tech side right now, but VR and AR are making leaps and bounds in allowing people to connect in different ways online. We were working with a VR company, and the name escapes me right now, but we were able to bring in CAD assemblies of vehicles that we were developing, and have all members from all over the world join this kind of virtual workspace to view the vehicle in full size interact with it, explode out different components, hide things. It really allows you to accelerate the product development life cycle and reduce the need to kind of prototype physically at full scale without losing the ability to kind of visualize it and interact with it. So all of that's really interesting. I think we're going to see a hybrid approach. What I'm super interested about is how that's going to impact organizational structures and hierarchies. As you know, I'm a big proponent of decentralized organizations or autonomous organizations, which have been enabled by distributed ledger technologies like blockchain technologies that allow people to come together in unique ways and function in the same kind of manner that an organization would, but without the need for a kind of structured hierarchy. So these types of new organizations are really starting to develop and grow nowadays, especially as like blockchain technology matures and grows. I think it's really, really early for them still, but I think they're going to become really profound and really widespread over the coming years. And that's something we're working on at rLoop as well, and plan to launch in the coming months, is our own kind of structured, decentralized, autonomous organization as well. So those are some of the ways that I see, the modern work environment being impacted, both from a technological perspective as well as an organizational perspective.
Well, I think we also have the societal aspect with that as well. If you look at, for instance, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, a Google, a Facebook, told their employees you can work from home indefinitely starting, I think it was last year, summer or something. Yeah. So I think also the digital nomads, so to speak, the live anywhere, work anywhere, you can live anywhere and work at Google nowadays, that will also enable different ways of working. So not per se, and living.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then what starts to become really important is access to this infrastructure, right? Being able to access high-speed internet, being able to access stable and reliable power, and it's unfortunately plagued more developing or emerging markets or countries where they've not had access to that kind of infrastructure and have kind of been left behind. But now, as we're starting to see people be able to move away from those dense urban centers and start to move to where they can have a more a better cost of living, but they're going to want to see the same kind of quality of living that they're used to and familiar with. So you're right, that's going to have a big impact. I think we're going to start to see people exiting these dense urban centers, not en masse, I wouldn't suspect, but it would have an impact, and hopefully in a positive way, where this kind of infrastructure and reliability becomes more widespread and more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brent, you've been in the crowdsourcing environment for over 5 years, 6 years now. What would you say is the biggest myth if we're talking about innovating, crowdsourcing, innovating via the power of the crowd?
The biggest myth?
The biggest myth.
The biggest myth. That's do you have some common myths that you can share? I think it's not a,
Or a common myth is also fine. I think maybe one personally is that it's easy, that you can just throw out an idea, like, hey guys, I have an idea, and it all just falls together automatically. Because as we said, communicating, bridging those distance takes a lot of effort as well, and you have a community to nurture and to work with, and it's a lot of time and effort still, even if it's all just online.
you're not working with a couple co-founders or a team of 5 or 10 people. You're dealing with hundreds, potentially thousands of people. It's immensely difficult, or challenging, I should say. I can't tell you how much, everybody at rLoop in those early days was sacrificing to help facilitate this community, not just financially, but the time that they would be spending on their own hobbies, time they'd be spending with their families, personal development. It's a lot of effort and a lot of time, and if anybody has any kind of notion that it's a simple thing, absolutely not. That is not the case. There's incredible rewards to it. I've got friends that I've made all over the planet because of this. I'm able to speak with you on a Thursday afternoon here in Toronto, after having worked with you for 5 years or 4 years, however long it's been. There's a lot of great things that come out of it when it's done right, but it's absolutely a challenge, and there's a lot of effort and sacrifice involved. The other thing I would probably just say is that it's not, like you were kind of hinting at earlier, it's not a solution to everything. There are particular cases where it's going to be valuable, and it's going to be appropriate, but if speed or some other aspects like control are important to you, it's not going to be the appropriate route. So I think there's a balance of figuring out where and when it might be appropriate to build, and crowdsourcing is kind of really, really broad term as well. It could be anything from getting creating a feedback loop with the community that you're wanting to engage with, to Kickstarter or Indiegogo style crowdsourcing, where you're getting those early adopters to back your project. Or it can be the case of, like rLoop and these decentralized autonomous organizations, where you're quite literally building a community to build and solve challenges together. So there's a whole bunch of different kind of facets of crowdsourcing, and finding out where it's best applied. It's not a solve everything. It's something that's going to be appropriate for everything, and it's certainly a challenge on its own. And I think because it is so, to a degree, it's really new at least in the kind of widespread knowledge. There's not like a playbook or a framework to follow. So in many ways, you're kind of beating your own path.
And I think different communities, different questions, depending on what's your goal with the crowdsourcing. What do you want to achieve? How much involvement of the community do you want? That also influences the type of relationship and how much effort and time you have to put in it as well.
Absolutely. It's totally true. And there's some good examples of companies who have been able to do so successfully, and there's, for every one of them, there's 5 or 10, disasters. So it's important to, I think, do your research, educate yourself, learn from the mistakes of others. That's the benefit of, building in public and an open source kind of environment, is we spread this knowledge. Like we were discussing earlier, knowledge is an incredibly powerful resource. And when you use it or spread it, it's not spent. Rather, it increases in value the more people that are able to engage and interact with it. And it also kind of speaks to that importance of having a diverse community. If you're putting stuff out there, and doing it publicly and in an open way, and allowing people to engage with it and modify it, you just never know how it's going to end up being developed to solve different challenges and problems. So I think knowledge is probably our most valuable resource, and I'm a huge proponent of sharing that openly with a community.
Absolutely. Before we go into the wrap up, you earlier mentioned something new that rLoop is working on, especially now moving forward with the future of work and with online collaboration. Can you tell us a bit more about that, or is that too early?
It's probably a little early, but I can give some little nuggets. So I've spoken about it publicly for 5 years now, all around the world. But I think the kind of maturity of the technology to enable these kinds of organizations is getting to a point where it's feasible now. So what's really interesting for me is wanting to give people the ability to generate wealth. I'm going to start to get a little philosophical, but generally, like you're not going to become no one really gets rich or wealthy by renting out your time, and that's essentially what you're doing in a day-to-day job. And I'm an entrepreneur, and our audience is an entrepreneur, so they'll understand.
Yeah, they'll understand that.
Yeah, this viewpoint. But what's important to me is that I want to create the kind of environment or world where people are able to generate wealth based on their inputs or their contributions to something. So rather than just here's $20 an hour or whatever the case might be, and anything beyond that, is owned by the company or the organization. Rather, if people had the ownership over what they were building, what they were contributing, it's easy to say, and it's much harder to kind of measure and monitor, especially in a kind of open way. But again, I think the tools and the blockchain space are enabling this now more than ever. But we've been talking about for 5-6 years, creating this type of environment where people are able to come in, contribute to projects that are meaningful to them. And another big, I'm another big proponent of having purpose and meaning to your work. I think that's when people really shine and show what they're capable of doing.
Absolutely.
So if you create an environment where people can come in, they can trust that their contributions are being measured and they're going to be I was going to say rewarded, but that implies that it's a financial or some kind of a.
Well, you can have different rewards, right? You have intrinsic.
That's what I mean. I was looking for a better word than rewards. But if they can understand that they're going to be recognized for their contributions and attributed for their work, and then whatever kind of economic activity that their work is able to generate, that they're equitably compensated for that, or equitably share in whatever success that what they contributed to has. So that's the kind of environment that I want to build, and I think we've got a unique means to be able to do that. Using blockchain tech, using NFTs, which has exploded recently. Everybody is familiar with NFTs now. But we were working with groups like Materium out of the UK 3-4 years ago on concepts like this, wrapping intellectual property and contributions into an NFT, and then being able to fractionalize that so people who contributed to that intellectual property have their equitable ownership over it. That's the kind of structure that we're building. And what I want to do is be able to focus that attention and energy towards, real problems that we're facing, largely in environmental context and in natural resource context. So whether it's food, agriculture, water, climate change, stuff like that, there's a lot of I think there's a lot of potential for us to innovate to solve these solutions. And my hypothesis is that not only is it possible to solve them, but that we can do so in a very lucrative manner and an economically lucrative manner. So that's the kind of work that we've been doing. And I think it's culmination of 6-7 years of our work at rLoop, and certainly something that I'm going to, devote my life towards seeing become a reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I can imagine, especially after the whole Corona crisis, we have a climate change crisis. We have so much crisis waiting for us. Big challenges, but also big opportunities. And those as well call for new ways of thinking, new ways of innovating. And I'm sure that via innovation, via the crowd, can have a very meaningful impact for that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And you see it actually, and sorry to belabor the point, but locally we saw, like when the pandemic first hit and everyone was worried about PPE and the ability of hospitals to accommodate the overwhelming demand on it, we saw communities getting together, working together to,
Oh, I think we're losing you. Brent, where did you go? I think the internet is
3D print PPE. Sorry, I'm freezing every 20 minutes.
Yeah,
for some
every
reason.
20 minutes. It's there's a timer on this glitch. You were telling about communities who were just starting after the pandemic just hit.
Yeah, you saw them coming together, pooling their resources, their knowledge, their capabilities to manufacture PPE, to gather resources, to design, alternative solutions to shortages that people were having. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that you see in a real world. Faced with a challenge, people will come together, work together, innovate to solve those challenges, and share that knowledge. And the more that it's shared, the more valuable it is, and the more meaningful its impact is.
Absolutely.
It's a real world, very relevant and very timely example of just what we've been speaking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brent, if people want to know more about this, where can they go?
So there's, let's see, there's the rLoop website is a great.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
To view some of the projects that we've historically worked on. I know it's currently being updated, so there's going to be some new material up there on some of the topics that we discussed today. Also, I'd love to engage with people who have thoughts or opinions on this topic or this matter. So my website is brentlessard.com.
Yeah.
I think
I've got contact. Definitely go to that website. I think it's one of the coolest websites out there, even though it's also one of the simplest. I'm still like, how did you do that? That's anyway, just check it out. Seriously, check it out.
Yeah, but absolutely, happy to connect with anybody there. I'm trying to limit my social media presence, so I may not be as accessible on Twitter or Instagram as I once was, but absolutely, love to meet with people and discuss these items with them. So those are probably the two best means to do so.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, Brent, I also linked those websites in the description of this video, so people can also find them there. Super Brent, cool. Thank you for joining us today. I really enjoyed our talk, and I'm sure our viewers did so as well. We spoke about crowdsourcing. What is crowdsourcing? When is it appropriate? When is it? When isn't it? And how does the future of crowdsourcing look like? And how do you keep a community engaged? How can you make it work for you? I really enjoyed that talk. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Saskia.
Yeah, likewise. As said, if you want to learn more about Brent, then definitely check out his website and check out the website of rLoop. And if you liked this kind of content, then make sure to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to the Startup Suite as well, so you never miss any new content. And if you want to know more about me, this show of the Startup Suite in general, go to the website, thestartupsuite.com. And join me again next week. I will be then joined by a risk taker coach, and we'll talk about how you can start up your business without risking it all. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. I hope to see you again next week, and I wish you a good remainder of the day. Bye, guys.